Anyway, so what I'm trying to do today is to map the cartography of power of the system we live. And the reason I want to do that is because I think there is what I want to do is decolonize the paradigms of political economy. If you look at the paradigms of political economy, what they basically emphasize is in two global structures of the system. They emphasize on the International Division of Labor, the economic aspects of the system, and the political system of the system. Okay, these are the main two hierarchies they look at. Now, in my work on decolonizing political economy, what I do is that I identify 15 hierarchies of power of the global system, 15. Those 15 hierarchies, they are most of them invisibilized by hegemonic paradigms of political economy, because the hegemonic paradigms of political economy are focusing only on the economic aspects of the system. And that's what you get when you listen to people talking about the global system. They usually talk about economics. That's the main thing they talk about. The other things are secondary, derivative, superstructural. They use these terms, some of them. And so it's not as important as the question of capitalist accumulation at a world scale. What I want to do here is to decolonize that perspective by shifting the geography of reason. If you look historically about how those paradigms were formed, they are basically looking at the world. Those who take a longue durée, a long-term perspective, they look at the world of, from the late 15th century, at Europe expanding. That is, they're looking at the world from Europe moving elsewhere, okay, in the European colonial expansion. And this movement of the European colonial expansion is a fundamental movement because it's through the European colonial expansion, through 400 years of European colonial expansion, when you have the formation of the global system in which we live today. Okay, this is fundamental. If you don't know that history, it will be very difficult for you to understand the kind of inequalities that exist in the world today. So that's why that history is important. But again, there is a difference between looking at Europe expanding, that is looking from Europe, and then looking at the European colonial expansion from Europe, than looking at the European colonial expansion from the other side. That is, instead of Europe expanding, Europe arriving. That is a major shift in the geography of reason. And I'm saying this because it immediately poses different questions than if you look at Europe expanding. If you look at Europe expanding, the main thing you find new of this new global system is the logic of capitalist accumulation at a world scale. That's the main thing that you will emphasize. But if you happen to be an indigenous woman in the Americas, let's say in the 16th century, or you happen to be a slave in the Americas in the 16th century, and instead of seeing Europe expanding, you see Europe arriving to you, okay, coming to you, then what expands is more than just an economic system. Because for an indigenous woman in the Americas, there is a package of power relations in the system that arrives and colonizes them that cannot be understood only under the gaze of an economic logic. Okay? Then you need to expand the framework of power hierarchies. And when you do that exercise, then you start seeing other hierarchies that were invisibilized in the paradigms of political economy. Because if you look at Europe arriving, then you not only see the economic logic that the Europeans producing this political economy they are seeing, but you see more than that. Because what expanded was a package of power relations that cannot be exhausted just in the economic hierarchies of the system. Okay? So that's why, that's the exercise I'm going to do now. To talk about those hierarchies that are invisibilized in the traditional paradigms of political economy, and how you shift the geography of reason and decolonize those paradigms, then you come to the understanding, of visibilizing. You come to visibilize other power relations that in those paradigms are invisible. Okay? So this is the exercise. So when first, the International Division of Labor of core countries and peripheral regions. Okay, this hierarchy is a hierarchy that is basically about how the European colonial expansion peripheralized regions of the world, and what that means is that they destroy whatever was there before, economically speaking, and put the people to work on activities that were of interest for European economy at the time. And so the peripheralization of a country happens by force, okay? It doesn't happen by free will or democratic means. The way this happened was through the European colonial expansion was through violence. And so violence is a constitutive force of rearticulation and producing a new economic system. And so people were found in different places of the world, and they were put to work through coerced forms of labor, okay, in plantations, haciendas, in mines, in different activities, according to the interests of Europe at the time. And we're talking about late 15th century, all the way till probably mid-20th century. The European colonial expansion covers a huge, 400 years or more. Okay, this part of world history, and it creates then a system in which now everybody's in. There's nobody outside. Okay, everybody's inside this system. And then what you have is that they put people to work through coerced form of labor, which means it's a cheap form of labor, okay? And then these people will produce commodities to be sold in the world market for a profit, okay? And the profits will be concentrated here in the core zones. That's why you have all these inequalities, okay, through the domination and exploitation of labor in these regions, okay? And the exploitation not only of labor, but of raw materials, okay? Because then you have also the raw materials, the appropriation of raw materials in these regions. Then you have a global interstate system, which is a political military system, okay, at a world scale. And you have the institutionalization of this with the Westphalia Treaty in the mid-17th century. That's the moment it got crystallized as an institutional system, but it started before with the expansion of the Iberian Peninsula into the Americas, with Spain and Portugal in the late 15th century. But then it got institutionalized when the Dutch displaced Spain as the center of this new historical system that started in 1492. So the foundational year is 1492. That year is important because it marks a before and after in terms of the formation of this system. Okay, that before and after 1492 is a foundational moment. Okay, because it's out of this. It's in this moment when you have the formation of the European colonial expansion, and then the formation of a world market of commodities through this international division of labor of core periphery. Okay? And then you have the political military system. The political military system is fundamental because it's this, as I said, the international division of labor was formed through violence. So in order to enslave people, in order to appropriate resources, in order to basically plunder territories and communities, etc. Those things, you need the political military system to be able to, by force, force people to work for you for nothing, okay? Or take over the raw materials for your own benefit, okay? This thing, that's why the interstate system is fundamental. So you have core states and peripheral states or peripheral regions. Now, during a period of 400 years, this relationship was done through colonial administrations, fundamentally through colonial administrations. Okay, this relationship. Most of the population of the world were living under European colonial rule. Okay, most of the population of the world. This went on for centuries. That's why you have a major shift in the world economy, because Europe before 1492 was an isolated province of the world. Okay, and it was quite poor and underdeveloped relative to other places, relative to China, relative to India, relative to the Muslim world, relative to the Incas and the Aztecs in the Americas, relative to many other civilizations. Europe was really poor and underdeveloped. The major shift of the rise of the West was this European colonial expansion, that by taking advantage of military force, they imposed a new international division of labor on the rest of the world. So what they did was to destroy everything that was out there and peripheralize the whole world, okay? Subordinated the economy of the whole world for the interests of the West. That's when you have then the rise of the West over this period of time. And that's when you have so-called Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. This was done at the same time that they have enslaved most of the world. So that you cannot have Industrial Revolution in Europe without understanding European colonialism and enslavement of other people in the world. The two go together. There is a bibliography, a huge bibliography about this. If you're interested, we can pass on bibliography on this question if you have doubts. From Eric Williams, Capitalism and Slavery, all the way to the work of John Hobson, recent work of John Hobson, showing how Europe, the Industrial Revolution was basically constructed through enslavement. There was a direct connection between slavery, the Atlantic slave economy, slavery in the Americas, and industrialization in Europe. Okay? So anyway, so paradigms of political economy, this is basically what they deal with. Okay? These two global structures. Now, the rest of the things I'm going to be talking about here are things that those paradigms do not account for. Okay? And then what I'm going to do is then come back to the question, to the economic question, once we go over these other structures, because then the point I want to make is that once you take into account these other structures, then you need to rethink this space again, okay? The so-called economic and state structures, okay? So one thing that we need to talk is that when you look at Europe arriving and not Europe expanding, then is the global racial ethnic hierarchy. Global racial ethnic hierarchy, all these structures were put simultaneously. It was not that the Europeans arrived, they first put the economy, and then they did the global racial ethnic hierarchy, then they did patriarchy, and then no. It was all at the same time. Okay? Because when the Europeans expanded, they came with military structure, knowledge structures, patriarchal structures, racist vision about the other, etc. All these things came at the same time. It's not at first a big, first one thing, then the other. Okay, all these things happen simultaneously, and so there's no last instance here. Okay, there's no last instance. I'm saying this because I don't want to be read here as last instance. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. But there is a global racial hierarchy of the West and the rest. Global racial hierarchy refers to a hierarchy of superiority, inferiority along the line of the human. Okay? I explained that in detail during my lectures last week. I cannot go in detail again over this because there's no time. But this is a global racial hierarchy is a hierarchy of superiority, inferiority along the line of the human, which install a racist hierarchy. Okay? Because then some people above the line of the human are considered human, and people below the line of the human are considered non-human or subhumans. And the problem with this hierarchy is that you have a division of 20% of humanity considered human and 80% of humanity considered non-human or subhuman. Okay? And so this is a very important structure that is going to have an impact over the other structure, as I'm going to discuss in a few minutes. But keep in mind that the way this is constructed is through this Western superiority over the rest. Okay? Part of the narrative of the West is to say that they were always superior to the rest. And they invent a historiography that is a false historiography. Okay? That false historiography tells you that Europeans were already an advanced civilization and that Europeans come from the Greeks. No? And then from the Greeks to the Roman Empire. And then from the Roman Empire they jump to the Renaissance. Okay? And then from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment. And then from Enlightenment to scientific progress in the 19th century and so on. Okay? This linear history is a false invention of history. Okay? There was no Greek civilization was not European 5 centuries before Christ. Okay? Greek civilization was a crossover of Egyptian, which was Bantu civilization, African, okay? Persian and Phoenician civilization. You want to know more? Read Martin Bernal, Black Athena. Black Athens, no? Black Athena. That book, Martin Bernal, a professor at Cornell University in the US, he produced like 3 volumes on this question that is just a huge research, detailed research. This idea that the Greeks were Europeans, this is a great fiction to justify superiority over the rest, when in fact the Greeks have nothing to do with what we call European today or the West. So this was an invention of 17th, 18th century. European thinkers at the time. And they tried to put an origin there. Now, in the middle, if you watch carefully, between the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, there is a period there that they call Dark Ages and Middle Ages. What is that? Dark Ages, Middle Ages. I have no name. This is like, they cannot name it. So they put Dark Ages, Middle Ages to basically obscure something there that happened that they don't want to. They cannot deal with it. Okay? So they could call, they have names, Greek civilization, Roman Empire, then they jump to the Renaissance, in between Dark Ages, Middle Ages. What is that? Well, that has a name, and that name is Islam. Okay? That's Islam. Okay? Islamic Europe. The whole south of Europe was Islamic. And sciences such as medicine, physics, astronomy, mathematics, algebra, Greek philosophers, all of them came to Europe through the Islamic civilization in the south of Europe. Okay? At the time when in Europe you were burned alive for reading Aristotle or Plato, okay? It was the Islamic philosophers who were reading Aristotle and Plato. Okay? And they were the ones who were translating Aristotle and Plato. And so people here that wanted to know about the Greek civilization, they have to cross over there to study the Greeks. Because over here, you will be burned alive. Okay? I'm saying this because look at the great invention. They're telling you that they come originally from the Greeks. Well, that's a completely false, because the Greeks arrived here through Islam and Islamic philosophers. Okay? They were the ones who took seriously the knowledge produced in Greek civilization. Okay? Here in Europe, nobody took that seriously for more than 1,000 years. Okay? So this is not in the memory of any European so-called European at the time, okay? So they invent this history to make you believe that they were always superior to the rest. In fact, this is not true, okay? This is a racist narrative of history, okay? That we have bought and is still repeated in the universities. Okay, I discussed about the university and we're going to discuss it in a few minutes. But anyway, so I'm saying this because this structure superiority, inferiority over the line of the human it goes at the level of considering the other inferior biologically, genetically, spiritually, epistemically, culturally, economic, politically, etc. So the inferiority along the line of the human is constructed through many dimensions. Okay? Now, Christian patriarchy. Not the patriarchy that got globalized was the Christian patriarchy. It was not any patriarchy. Okay? Especially Judeo-Christian patriarchy. This was a patriarchy that got globalized with the European colonial expansion. There were regions in the world where patriarchy have other codes. There were non-Christian patriarchy that operate through other codes before the European arrival. There were regions in the world where there was no patriarchy. There were equal relations in terms of gender and in terms of sexuality. There were places in the world where, there were a variety of diverse systems of gender and sexuality in many places around the world, okay? Up till 1492. Now, with the European colonial expansion, in some places where there was some kind of local patriarchy, they destroyed whatever was there and imposed the Christian patriarchy. Okay, the codes of Christian patriarchy. They have a particular form of thinking about women, particular form of thinking about sexuality, particular form of thinking about the family, etc. Okay, family structure, etc. Which is very different from local forms of patriarchy in other parts of the world. So in some places they destroyed the local one and imposed this other one. In other places they got hybridized with the local one. Okay, and then there are a mixture of forms of patriarchy that had both the Christian form of patriarchy with local ones. In other places, they just did complicity with the local one and did not impose the Christian one. Okay, so you need to look and account historically for this. You cannot a priori say, oh, it was this way or that way. You need to look at different regions around the world and see how these things were developed, There were places in the world where there was no patriarchy, zero patriarchy, and they just destroyed whatever was there and imposed the Christian one. Okay? That happened in West Africa, that happened in the Americas, okay? That happened in many places where patriarchy simply did not exist before European arrival. Okay? There are some historical work I can recommend you, okay, like the work by Yoruba feminists, documenting West Africa, and the title of the book is The Invention of Woman. Okay, I don't remember her last name. It's complicated Yoruba last name, very long.
Oyewumi.
Oyewumi. Oyewumi. Is that her name?
Oyewumi.
Yes, that's her. Could you repeat it aloud?
Oyewumi.
Yes.
So, I can write on the blackboard.
Yeah. So, this book documents West Africa. Now you have Silvia Marcos documenting the Mesoamerica, okay, and showing how indigenous people in many parts of America did not have patriarchy, okay. This is very important, especially with debate with Westernized feminism, that they look at patriarchy the same way the political economists look at the economy, that they think that this is the main, that what expanded was patriarchy with no last name, no Christian patriarchy, no? It was patriarchy and period, because in their view, patriarchy was a system that existed for 5,000 years. Well, that's true in the case of Europe. There was 5,000 years of patriarchy here. That doesn't mean that was the history in other parts of the world. And that's true that you have Christian patriarchy, 3,000 years here, Judeo-Christian patriarchy, being spread in many parts of what we call Europe today, no? But that doesn't mean that in the rest of the world was the same. Okay? To think that European history is world history is already a Eurocentric view. Okay? Because the fact that you have local history in Europe happening X or Y here doesn't mean it's the same thing elsewhere, especially before 1492. Now, once you have the European colonial expansion, and once you have the destruction of other forms of existing, living, thinking, etc., then you have a system like today where everybody's in. Okay? And where now you have, in a sense, in a way or another, with different degrees of westernization everywhere. Okay? So, you have in this Christian patriarchy the domination of male over woman, and then a sexual hierarchy with heterosexuals in position of domination over homosexual and lesbians. Okay? So this is a global hierarchy that goes together, okay, with the other hierarchies that got globalized at a world scale. Okay? And then you need to historicize how this happened in different regions of the world. And you need to look at this at the concrete. Okay? In the concrete. Now, so you have something very particular here, and that is that for the first time in world history, you have a patriarchal system in which a small number of women have more power and resources than the majority of males in the world. For the first time in world history, you have a patriarchal system, such as this one, Christian patriarchy, in which a small number of women have more power and resources than the majority of the males in the world. Okay? So this is a paradox, but it's a real paradox of this system. You cannot make sense of what I just said from a Western feminist point of view. You see, because you're only looking at gender and sexuality bracket from the rest. You see? It can only make sense if you understand how this hierarchy functions. You see? How this hierarchy cut across questions of gender. Okay? And divide and split the world. Okay? And how this hierarchy cut across question of economy. Okay? That's the only way you can make sense of that. That is, Western women have more power, resources, and privilege in this system than the majority of the non-Western males in the world, which are the majority of the males in the world. Okay? You can only make sense of that if you understand how the global hierarchy operates. Okay? This racial ethnic hierarchy operates. I explained that in detail in my talks last week, when I was talking about the zone of being and the zone of non-being, the Fanonian perspective about what racism is about. So what happened is that in the zone of being, in the zone of those whose humanity is not in question, okay, very fast, I'm going to say very fast and simplistically, just for the sake of try to understand each other. Maybe it will be the worst thing I can do now, because maybe it will be misunderstood. But I gave plenty of examples last week. I explained that in detail. Check the videos. In the zone of being, the problem with racism is that it's a hierarchy of superiority and inferiority along the line of the human. And then what you have is something like, we don't have space here. We don't have space. Anyway, so what we have, put a line there, and you put on top of the line the S of superior, below the line I of inferior, okay? The S of superior equal a human with an H, capital H, okay? Equal zone of being. Then below the line, you have a I of inferior equal subhuman, non-human equal zone of non-being. What happened with these two zones is that in the zone of being and zone of non-being are heterogeneous zones. They are not homogeneous. That means that in the zone of being, people whose humanity is recognized doesn't mean that there's no conflicts there. There are class conflicts, there are gender conflicts, sexual conflict, religious conflict, economic conflict, you name it. There are conflicts inside there. The problem is that because the humanity of the people in that zone is recognized, then the way the system manages the conflicts is through regulation and emancipation. What that means is that the conflicts are managed through codes of law, civil rights, human rights, labor rights, women's rights, etc. That means, and also through discourse of emancipation, freedom, liberty, equality, etc. What that means is that the conflicts are negotiated and struggled through, as a trend, peaceful means, with exceptional moments of violence. Okay? As a trend, conflicts are managed through peaceful means, with exceptional moments of violence. Because the humanity of the other there, of the oppressed other, oppressed for reason of class or gender or sexuality, in the zone of being, their humanity is recognized. Therefore, the dominant hegemonic I, okay, of Western male, capitalist, imperial, colonial, patriarchal, heterosexual males, okay, that elite will manage the conflict there in a different way than in the zone of non-being. In the zone of non-being, because the humanity of the others is not recognized, is a space of lawlessness. Lawlessness. That is a space where violence and appropriation are the fundamental means of managing the conflicts. Okay? Violence and appropriation becomes the fundamental means of managing the conflict with exceptional moment of peace, of regulation and emancipation. Okay? It's inverted. So, this implies that if you're a woman, let's say you're a working class, okay? And you're oppressed in the zone of being. Let's say you're a worker in, let's say, in the Boeing company in Washington or in the Airbus company in France. And you earn $150 or 150 euros an hour. Not a day, an hour. Okay? And you work 8 hours a day. And there is a recognition code of law, code of civil rights, etc. So you want to organize a union, let's say, because you're having conflicts with whoever is the corporation, okay? You organize a union, okay, there will be fights in the courts of law, you might do a demonstration in the streets, you might do many things, but your life is not at stake. Your life is not at stake. If you happen to be a woman working in maquiladora in northern Mexico, and you earn $2, not an hour, a day, and you work 14, 16 hours a day, and you try to organize a union there, you know that your life is at stake because they're going to kill you. Okay? And they're going to kill you because in the zone of non-being, your life is not recognized as a human. Okay? In the zone of non-being, your life means nothing for the powers that be. That means they can kill you, and they know, women in those spaces know what risk they're taking if they are trying to organize a union. Okay? So I'm giving you this as an example, a dramatic example, but we can see this zone of being, non-being across different spaces. You could see zone of being, non-being in Berlin. You could see zone of being, non-being in Paris. You could see zone of non-being in Colombia, in Brazil, in many places. Okay? This is not a geographical space. This is a positionality in a racial, ethnic hierarchy of superiority, inferiority along the line of human, which is the racist structure that I've been describing here as the global racial ethnic hierarchy. Now, what happened, coming back to this question of gender and sexuality, what happened when you are the other in the zone of being? The other in the zone of being, let's say you as a Western woman in the zone of being are being oppressed along gender lines, or you're a queer and you're being oppressed along sexual lines. Okay? But what happened is that still, because you are positioned in the zone of being, you're going to get more power, resources, access to civil rights, labor rights, women rights, etc. Okay? that is going to give you a position of privilege relative to the people oppressed along the same lines, sexuality, gender, class, etc., in the zone of non-being. Okay? That's why I said something shocking, which is that for the first time in world history, you have a patriarchal system in which a small number of women in the world have more power, resources, and access to privilege than, even if oppressed in the zone of being, than the majority of the males in the world. And you cannot make sense of it if you understand how the racial ethnic line, this line of the human, cut across gender oppression. You see the point? Or sexual oppression, or class oppression. Okay? So this is analytically the response to that statement. We don't have time to go in detail about this. I explained that last week in more detail. So, now we go into the global epistemic hierarchy. Okay? The global epistemic hierarchy is a hierarchy of superiority-inferiority along the line of the human, but relative to knowledge. That is, the epistemic hierarchy is talking about Western European knowledges being considered superior over non-Western knowledges. Okay? Epistemologies, cosmologies, points of view, etc. Non-Western are considered inferior to the West. But this hierarchy I mentioned ad nauseum last week with a lot of detail, how this hierarchy is epistemically racist-sexist hierarchy, because racism and sexism go together. Okay? The reason I'm calling this hierarchy epistemically racist-sexist is because if you watch carefully, the institution per excellence of this hierarchy is the Westernized university. I have a whole lecture last Wednesday about this. I'm going to go very fast over a few points to keep going. The Westernized university is a university that is basically organized along epistemic, racist, sexist foundation. Okay? And so what happened is that in the Westernized university, if you look at any department in the social science, any discipline, or in the humanities, the canon of thought are Western males of 5 countries: Italy, France, Germany, England, and the USA. Okay? If you watch the canon of thought of the departments of social science and the humanities, okay, in the Westernized university, is this clear? I see it. Okay, if you watch the canon of thought in the departments of social science and humanities in the Western University, you are reading fundamentally males of 5 countries: Italy, Germany, France, UK, and USA. That's what you read as a canon of thought. You're supposed to read these authors as the quintessential authors that will give you a universal view, a social scientific theory to understand everything else in the world. That's the pretension of the universalism of the Westernized university. Pretension is that these males of these 5 countries have produced the greatest theories in the world, and everywhere else have to just apply them. Okay? Now think carefully about it. The social historical experience, okay, of the people in these 5 countries are supposed to give you, okay, the concepts of the social historical experience of the rest of humanity. You cannot have it more arrogant than that, okay? And you cannot have it more provincial than that, disguised as universal. Okay? It's a very narrow provincialism disguised as universalism. But why is it that they have that possibility of selling their knowledge as if it was a superior knowledge over the rest? Well, you cannot make sense of that, you know, if you don't go into this question, how the racial hierarchy places these males in the superiority of the scale, and therefore in the epistemological scale, they are at the top. and the rest are inferior to them. Okay? This is the pretension. And this is what is being sold as social scientific theory. Okay? Now, what happened with the critical thinkers, women and males, okay, of the non-Western world? They are invisibilized, they're inferiorized, they do not belong, they're not part of the canon of the text you read. They are there, they have produced amazing work, but you don't read them. You probably don't even know their names, because they are invisibilized in this Eurocentric fundamentalism that you get through the Westernized university. You don't have epistemic diversity in the Westernized university. What you have is one way of thinking, which is this Eurocentric fundamentalism at the foundation that is sexist and racist, epistemically speaking. Why I'm saying it's racist? It's racist because it inferiorizes all the knowledges coming from the non-Western world and from non-Western epistemologies and systems of thought. Okay? These are completely inferiorized. Why I'm saying they're sexist? Because there's zero women in the canon. It doesn't matter if you're a Western woman or you are a non-Western woman. You don't belong to the canon. There's no woman in the canon. It's only Western males. So it's a sexist, racist epistemology that is at the foundation of the Eurocentric fundamentalism of the Westernized university. Okay? So this is something I discussed in more detail last week. I'm not going to go and continue on that. Just to say that you need to look at this, and the institution per excellence of this structure is the Westernized university. I'm saying Western, I didn't say Western. I say Westernized university. I didn't say the Western university, because Westernized university, you could find it anywhere in the world. It's a global structure. It's a global structure to create the elites that are going to be the intermediaries between these people and these people. You see? It's going to socialize the elites that are going to become the intermediary between the West and the rest. Okay? So you have, in the Western University, you could be in Bogota, Rio de Janeiro, Berlin, Paris, San Francisco, New York, Dakar, anywhere you are, the Western University, you're going to read the same white males. Okay? The same white males. No Western woman, no non-Western woman. Okay? No non-Western men. They're out. Okay? With a few exceptions. I know a professor that gave this and that. Yes, these are exceptions within the rule. Okay? You have a few professors here and there that do an effort to go beyond that. But those are exceptional, because that's not what you're supposed to be doing in those disciplines. In those disciplines, you're supposed to learn about the thinking of these Western males, of these 5 countries. Okay? Now, you have the spiritual hierarchy. Spiritual hierarchy is the privilege of Christianity over the rest, where Christianity appears as the superior spirituality, and the other ones are subalternized, inferiorized, relative to Christianity. Christianity meaning by that Protestant and Catholic. Okay? So you have these two versions that have been globalized with the European colonial expansion. Okay? And the institution of that is not the Westernized university, it's the church, Christian church, Catholic or Protestant. That goes together with the European colonial expansion. Okay? So then you have linguistic hierarchies with the privilege of European language over non-European languages. Okay? Wherever these structures go and colonize the world, always European language. Just look at United Nations statistics. Scientific journals, 90% of scientific journals, according to United Nations statistics, are written in French, German, and English. The language most spoken by the people in the world have no access to these journals in terms of the language. It's only 10% of the journals are written in other languages. Okay? That gives you an idea, no? When you think about the fact that humanity and the demographics of this planet is larger than the people who speak English, German, or French. Okay? So that tells you coloniality at the level of language. What access to knowledge you have is going to be determined a lot by what language you're able to read. And if you happen to speak Urdu or Chinese or Arabic or etc., languages that are spoken by most of the people in the world, you're out of the conversation because you have no access to scientific journals to start with. Okay? It's just an example. No? The privilege of European language over non-European language. Global aesthetic hierarchies, where the Western art and Western artists, especially male artists, are considered superior to the rest. And then the art produced by non-Western people is called primitive art, naive art. Have you heard that? It's inferiorized over the Western male artist. Okay? You see, again, this hierarchy is being represented at the level of aesthetics. Okay? Again, a lot of Western woman artists are also out of the conversation, okay, in terms of access to these recognitions. Okay? So it's again, it's epistemic, it's artistically speaking, aesthetically speaking, it's racist and sexist. The way I'm describing here the structures of the system we live, and I'm using a language that I might not like. I don't like to use it, but it's the only way you can name these things. You see, I'm making this distinction. People, oh, but you're using a language. Well, this is the language that I'm trying to describe, a system that operates under this logic. I don't like it, but if we want to understand how it works, we need to fall prey of some of these concepts of the way they operate, you see? So I'm just clarifying that because I have the experience of people saying, well, you're using the thing. Well, I'm talking about something that we need to understand the language they use and the logic under which it's articulated. Then we can invent new language to go beyond, you know, but the first step is to identify what are we talking about. Then we have ecological global structures, okay, places that are the garbage of the world, okay, places where, because of the hierarchy that I mentioned of the zone of being, non-being, there are zones of non-being at the level of ecology, okay, because they are considered places where, you know, the humanity of the people are not recognized, and so there are garbage. There's perceived as garbage places, okay, for the waste of the West. There are even countries that the West paid them something to get all the garbage stuck there. You know about this? You know, so this is you know, it's destructive. It's destructive because, of course, if we are all living within, you know, there is a problem with this because there is also the epistemological and cosmological coming in, which is that in the only tradition have the concept of nature, quote unquote, is the West. In other traditions, they use other terms, Pachamama, Tahuit, they use other terms because they don't make the split between nature and the human. Okay, they think of cosmos. That would be the closer word we have in Western language to talk about Pachamama or Tahuit in Islam or things like this, which is cosmos. Cosmos means we're all inside. The notion of the West, the Cartesian hegemonic notion of the West, is the split between the human and nature. Nature is over there, the human is over here, you see, and then nature is a means towards an end. Now, if you think that you're outside nature and that whatever you do to nature won't affect you because you have split the two, okay, and you think that nature is a means towards an end, any technology you build along those lines, along that rationality, is going to have the seed of the destruction of life. You see? Because you haven't thought about reproducing life. You have thought of so-called nature as something exterior to you and to the human, and you have thought of so-called nature as a means towards an end. So you could destroy it as long as you achieve your end. You see? So there you have the seeds of destruction of life, because any technology you build along those lines is just going to destroy life, human life and non-human life. Now, what happened with notions like Pacha? Notion like Pachamama is a cosmological notion which we are all inside. It's nobody outside that. You know, and any technology you build, and so-called nature, quote unquote, is not a means to an end, but an end in itself. So any technology you build along those lines, along that rationality, has the reproduction of life embedded in the technology. You see? If you follow that cosmology to build technology, you see? So I'm just throwing those concepts for you to understand how even the notion, the way we think about so-called the ecology of the planet is already embedded in a Western-centric perspective that has, as it sits, the destruction of life. That's why indigenous people in the Americas and aboriginal people in Asia and indigenous people in Africa and many places, they have called this system a civilization. They don't call this an economic system. They call it a civilization. And I agree with them. And this is why I'm going over this, to show you that the idea that we're living in an economic system is a very narrow, Eurocentric way of looking at this, because it's taking the position of Europe expanding. But when you look at it from the other side, shift the geography of reason, look at Europe arriving, there is a multiplicity of power relations and hierarchies that comes together and that have formed the global system we live, and that the indigenous people in the world call a civilization, but a civilization of death. They call it civilization of death not only because this system has killed more human beings in world history than any other social system before, but also because this system has killed possibilities of life beyond the human. To the point that we don't know if in 100 years we will be here, okay? We don't know that. That's a question mark. Global warming, etc. All these questions are raised because through this system we have killed more life understood in a non-anthropocentric way than any other historical system. That's why they call this system a civilization, and they call it a civilization of death. Okay? So the question is now, I mean, I have other hierarchies I can go on. I have identified like 15, like hierarchy of age. Hierarchy of age. In non-Western perspective, the older you are, the more respectful you are. The more sabio, the more wise you are, and more respected in the community. In Western civilization, the older you are, the more disposable you are, and the less respected you are. So you have also a hierarchy of age that I haven't mentioned here, a global pedagogical hierarchy that I haven't gone in details. I mean, we can go on. In the article that was distributed, I identified there 15. Okay, for those of you taking the seminar, 15 hierarchy, but there might be more that I haven't seen. Just to say that I refuse to use the term capitalist world system, global capitalism, capitalist system. I refuse to use that language. I refuse to use that language to name the global system in which we live, because that language leads us to the wrong impression or wrong understanding that the problem we live is an economic problem. The moment you think that the problem we live is an economic problem, you fall into the traps of 20th century socialism. 20th century socialism thought that because the problem was economic, if you solve the class conflicts and the economic problems of this system called capitalism, you solve the rest. Now, we saw the fallacy of that. We saw the fallacy of that in 20th century socialism. Not only the goals they put for themselves were not accomplished, because most of these places ended up being state capitalist societies disguised, in the name of worker states and things like that, when in fact they were state capitalists. Not only that, but they didn't solve the rest of the problems. That is, if you organize yourself against capital and you organize yourself in racist ways, in Eurocentric ways, in Christianocentric ways, in, aesthetically Eurocentric ways, epistemically in a Eurocentric, Western-centric way, in patriarchal, sexist, homophobic ways, in racist ways, then the whole thing gets corrupted. Because, the means determines the ends. It's not like the ends justify the means. It's that the means will determine the ends. So then the whole struggle against so-called capital got corrupted. You see? So you need to, the problem is that this is not an economic system. It's not only that. It has economic dimensions. Okay? But you cannot reduce the problem to that. We are living in a civilization, which is different. Okay? Because then we need to take into account all the complexity of ways of thinking, behaving, living, existing that are embedded in this and that are destroying life. Life understood in the most open way, okay? Not in anthropocentric ways. Okay? Because this is destroying human lives. A lot of human lives are being killed today while we talk here, okay? Due to the way this system operates. Okay? A lot of human life. But also non-human life is being affected. So, this civilization, I refuse to call it capitalist system or capitalist world system or global capitalism or things like that, like the Western left love to call it. And I am very critical of the Western left because the way you coin the terms this way, it immediately opens up a way of thinking and acting that is just leading you the wrong way, I think. Okay? Because then if the problem is economic, you think that you will solve the problem by solving the economic. You see? But then if the problem is not just economic, okay, it's economic, political-military, racial, sexual, gender, epistemic, spiritual, linguistic, aesthetic, ecological, pedagogical, and so on, then we're talking about more than an economic system. Then this is a civilization. And we refuse to use those terms. I don't know why. We refuse to use the term civilization to call this and to name it this way. Okay? Partly because we love from the left, from the Western left, to basically say, well, these other things are not that bad. The main thing is capitalism. We need to overcome capitalism, and then the rest we can handle it. Well, no. You're not going to be successfully able to defeat capitalism if you don't think about the fact that this is a package, that you cannot think of this package as a last instance. Okay, you cannot say, okay, the last instance, determination of the last instance. Okay, have you seen this debate in Western academia? The Marxists say the last instance is economic, the Barbarians say no, the last instance is culture, then the other says, and then you have chicken egg dilemmas. Then you go into chicken egg debates. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? Oh, the egg, not the chicken, not the egg, the chicken. We'll go nowhere. This is Eurocentric thinking at its best. Going nowhere with that. We need thinking of complexity. What I mean by that is I prefer to use terms such as, so look what I'm doing now. Look what I'm doing now. Look. Now I'm crossing everything, okay? Like this. Because I don't want you to read this as columns like that, I'm only putting the columns for communication purposes, but this is not the way it works. The way it works is more entanglement. That you need to historicize those entanglements. Okay? It's a notion of complexity, entanglement of multiple hierarchies, okay, and power relations in complex ways, with no last instance. Throw away the last instance, that doesn't work. Okay? Put things in entangled ways, historicize them, so you know how they have been evolving, how they work, okay? But throw away this last instance. These are chicken egg dilemmas of Eurocentric thinking, leading nowhere. because all these things happen simultaneously at the same time. All these operations that I've been naming here, or these hierarchies of power, happen simultaneously at the same time. There's no first and second thing. It's all there, mixed up in historical reality. Okay? So I prefer to use terms such as the black feminists use, like intersectionality, to talk about the entanglement of multiple hierarchies of power, class, race, gender, sexuality, etc. Or heterarchies, multiple hierarchies entangled with each other in complex ways. I prefer to use those terms rather than the last instant of things like that, that always lead us into reductionist thinking. And then once you take the reductionist line, then you start believing yourself that by solving that last instant, you solve the rest. You see? And that never comes through. Okay? Because in fact, things do not happen that way. And so I prefer to name this system in a different way. Okay? I prefer to call this a capitalist patriarchal. It's capitalist. There is a capitalist logic to this, of course, but it's not the only thing happening in town here. You have also a patriarchal system with gender sexuality organizing the economy. Western-centric, Christianocentric. It's Western-centric because you have the privilege of the West over the rest. The West as superior, the rest as inferior. And then what you do and how much you earn in the capitalist system is going to be informed by how you classify in the racial and the hierarchy. If you happen to be in the zone of being as part of the West, you're going to earn more money, more resources, access to schools of rights and law, than if you happen to be in the zone of non-being. Okay, so how much you earn and what you do, okay, what you do and how much you earn for what you do is going to be organized by the idea of race. Okay? The idea of race is constitutive of the International Division of Labor. Okay? And then a modern colonial, because this idea that modernity is something that has nothing to do with the colonial world. It's a false idea. Okay? Modernity was built on the shoulders of enslavement and coloniality. So we're living in a modern colonial world. It's always modern and colonial. There's no modernity without coloniality. The two go together. This idea that somewhere or another Europe arrived to modernity, the rest of the world needs to catch up, that's a Eurocentric idea, because Europe arrived to so-called modernity by enslaving and colonizing the rest. That's why you have all this privilege in the zone of being. Okay? That's why it goes together, modern colonial. So I call it capitalist patriarchal, Western-centric, Christian-centric, modern colonial world system. And I call it a world system, it's a global system. Okay? So I prefer, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, to use a long phrase like that, okay? And people laugh in my face, than use the old naming of capitalist system, global capitalism, capitalist world system, that mislead us, because it invisibilizes more than it visibilizes what is at stake. So I prefer, at the risk of sounding ridiculous, to use a long phrase so that I become more visible what is at stake in this civilization than that short phrase called global capitalism. Okay, I'm going to, what time is it? Huh? Okay, I'm going to stop here for half an hour of discussion. Keep in mind that many things, I'm implying things that were discussed last week, but let's open the floor for a conversation.